Do you think bad drug offenders should be executed?
If they're criminals and they do something really bad, they deserve to be executed.
If prisoners resisted or tried to escape, it was fine to shoot and kill them.
And then there were times when they locked you in a cell for 30 days, torturing you with heat.
If you think you know how bad prison can be, think again. Prisons all over the world seem to be competing with each other to be crowned the worst in the world. And today we're ranking some of the deadliest in history. Each prison will fall into one of the following categories: hard knock life, maximum misery, abandon all hope, and welcome to hell. Some of these prisons are no longer around, thankfully, but others are still going strong. And trust me, you do not want to end up in one of these living nightmares. Which prison plans to hold inmates indefinitely? Why does one prison require all inmates to be shackled for their first 3 months? And what led to inmates losing toes during their incarceration? As always, let us know in the comments what you think. Did we miss anything? Were we way off? Does my hair look okay? You know the drill. Guantanamo Bay Prison sits on the southern coast of Cuba, but it's part of a naval base controlled and operated by the United States. The prison was created for the sole purpose of holding political prisoners and terrorists after the 9/11 attacks on New York City in 2001. Guantanamo started to accept inmates on January 11th, 2002, and its reputation for brutality has remained. We'll be putting this prison in the maximum misery category. Since its inception, of the 780 inmates who have been held at Guantanamo, only 7 have actually been convicted of crimes, with the others being held indefinitely with no trial date set. Some have been released after not being charged with any crimes at all. As a symbol of America's war on terror, Guantanamo Bay earned a very different reputation amongst the UN. It's a human rights nightmare here. We're talking being force-fed rectally during hunger strikes, long bouts of solitary confinement, squatting torture, and even unwarranted drug injections. As of 2025, only 15 prisoners remain. The rest have been transferred to another country or died while they were locked up. Surviving Guantanamo Bay requires the mental fortitude of a monk. Unfortunately, for some inmates, the abusive conditions were too much, leading to a handful of reported suicides. Our next prison is where virtually every inmate is expected to die while locked up, and they'll be all alone when the time comes. The ADX Florence Supermax prison is located in Colorado and is often referred to as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Opened in 1994, ADX was designed from the start for maximum security, with the intention of holding some of the United States' worst criminals. We're talking the Unabomber, the Boston Bomber, the Shoe Bomber, and drug kingpin El Chapo, who bombed his last escape attempt. Inmates here are held in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day, given subpar meals through a small slot in their cells, and have 1 hour of recreation per day by themselves. There's no contact with other inmates, no perks or conjugal visits, just you and the screams of others. Simply put, ADX fits nicely in the abandon all hope category, because you don't have any chance of escaping here.
I've seen individuals who, they just shut down. They refuse to participate in the program and they'll just shut down. They won't say anything to anybody else and they'll just sit there in their cell all day looking at the walls and they'll let their mind run away with them. If we let ourselves deteriorate, that's what'll happen to us.
The psychological torture has led to at least 9 inmates taking their own lives while imprisoned at ADX. To survive here, you'd have to keep your fingers crossed for a transfer. Otherwise, your days may be numbered. Our next prison is no longer functioning, and like ADX, it was known for being escape-proof. Alcatraz Island, aka The Rock, was a prison known for being an inescapable fortress. Well, almost inescapable. Surrounded by icy cold waters off the coast of San Francisco, it operated from 1934 until 1963. It housed some of the United States' most infamous criminals, including Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, not the singer, and James Whitey Bulger, all notorious mobsters. Prisoners only had a right to food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. Every other privilege, such as rec time or visits, had to be earned. We'll place it in the hard knock life category. Life at Alcatraz was governed by strict military-like routines and harsh discipline. A 6:30 a.m. morning whistle, 20-minute long meal times with no talking allowed, mandatory labor, no magazines or newspapers permitted, strict inmate counts every 30 minutes, and virtually no privacy, even when doing your business. Violating any of the rules here would land you in D Block, also known as the Hole, the cruelest punishment of all at Alcatraz. 5 cells containing barely anything, the worst of which had a hole in the floor for a toilet with next to no light. And prisoners would usually be confined naked.
Welcome to Alcatraz.
Okay, wow, I would do whatever I could to escape. Speaking of, over 30 years, 36 men tried to escape. All were either caught, shot, or found dead, with the exception of 3 men who, to this day, have never been found. The common belief is that they died in the water, either from drowning, hypothermia, or hungry sharks. Possibly all the above. While some folks have made the swim to the island from the mainland to prove it was possible, it certainly doesn't look easy. Surviving here meant keeping a low profile, following the rules, and I guess in some cases, being a strong swimmer, or Clint Eastwood. If you like having your own space, our next prison is not a place you'd want to be locked up. CECOT is a maximum security prison in El Salvador, mainly housing gang members belonging to MS-13, Barrio 18, and Tren de Aragua. With a capacity of 40,000, it's believed that the current inmate toll is closer to 20,000. But that doesn't mean detainees have a lot of room. At the very least, you'd think they would separate inmates based on gang affiliation. But in a place where your head is shaved on arrival, you're crammed into a cell with other violent offenders, and you get, at most, 30 minutes per day outside of your new digs, what do you expect? CECOT is fittingly going into the abandon all hope category. The lights are on 24/7, there are no visitors, and prisoners aren't allowed to communicate with their lawyers. As far as the Salvadorian government is concerned, every inmate at CECOT is a terrorist who will never leave. Scary stuff. Between the lack of human rights and potential for gang violence to occur at any given moment, your best bet to survive CECOT is to try to make friends so you don't become a target. Respect the guards and other inmates, and start wishing that you become one of the few to make it out. As awful as CECOT is, at least it doesn't house and experiment on children.
The camps are a living hell. I've seen people beaten and tortured there many times.
Camp 22 was a political prisoner camp established in 1965, located in the remote mountains of North Korea. Given its location and North Korea's reputation for its lack of human rights in general, this may be the deadliest prison on our list. This camp held men, women, and children, and was reportedly closed in 2012 based on satellite imaging. Still, the stories of what happened behind its 3,300-volt electric fence will send shivers down your spine. We'll place it in the Welcome to Hell category. At its peak, Camp 22 was estimated to have had 50,000 prisoners, and the prison wasn't meant for rehabilitation. It became known for forced labor, torture, and chemical experiments, including gas chambers and poisoned food. Reports have stated that up to 25% of the prison population died each year. Women who were pregnant would have to watch as their newborns were killed in front of them. Absolutely disgusting. The sad reality is that surviving a place like Camp 22 would be almost impossible. You'd need a miraculous escape, and if you were caught, you'd be almost guaranteed to be executed. For some, being executed would be welcomed, rather than face the daily torture that is a political prison. Unfortunately, Camp 22 isn't the only one on our list.
This was the medal. They put us here. They tied our hands like this and raised us up here.
Tadmur Prison in Syria was built in the 1930s, but got its horrific reputation between 1971 and 2000, when Hafez al-Assad ruled. On June 27, 1980, 1,000 inmates were killed by Syrian soldiers in one night. They were believed to be members or supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood, an organization that attempted to assassinate al-Assad the day before. Those who survived had to endure the stench coming from the mass grave just outside the prison. Some cells still had pieces of flesh and blood from the massacre when new prisoners arrived. This prison definitely deserves to be filed under maximum misery. Between the lack of medical care, the physical and psychological torture inmates endured, including not being able to even raise their heads, anyone who was imprisoned here has the scars to prove it.
Oh, Oh my God, guys, there's absolutely no light in here.
And this is not just for one or two or three, this is for many people.
An inmate was given one meal and one bathroom break a day. The only other time they could leave their cell, which was sometimes filled with rotting corpses of deceased prisoners, was to be tortured or interrogated.
They hanged 18 people at once here within minutes.
Tadmur, like Camp 22, wasn't a place designed for rehabilitation. Instead, it was a place for the government to set an example of what happens to those who don't follow orders. Surviving Tadmur would have required incredible strength, both mentally and physically. It closed for good in 2015 when the Islamic State took it over, destroying it shortly after. This next prison was also shut down for ominous reasons. But to help us keep this show up and running, please like and subscribe. Robben Island in South Africa dates back to the early 1700s, when it was a penal colony for the Dutch and British. It also served as a holding ground for people with leprosy from the mid-1800s until 1931. Later, it became a mental hospital. So, yeah, definitely haunted. After World War II, Robben Island became a maximum security prison, where political prisoners, mainly black men, were held during South Africa's apartheid era. Most notably, Nelson Mandela.
We are standing now at the cell where Mandela last left from. This was his last cell where he stayed.
Although it's not as deadly as some of the other political prisons, we'll be placing Robben Island in the hard knock life category. Physical abuse and psychological torment were what prisoners had to deal with on a regular basis. Some were kept in isolation for 10 months at a time. Other prisoners had bunkmates, but those in solitary rarely had any human contact at all. Visits allowing only immediate family members weren't permitted until 1975. By 1991, all of the inmates deemed political prisoners had been released from Robben Island, and it continued to operate as a medium security prison until 1996. Surviving Robben Island would be similar to the other political prisons on our list. It was just as much mental endurance as it was physical. It's all about staying active and finding peace in the chaos. Next is a prison nicknamed the Bangkok Hilton, but it's far from a 5-star hotel. Kwang Central Prison is home to some of Thailand's most violent offenders, with most inmates serving life sentences or counting down their final days as they wait on death row. To ensure new inmates don't harm themselves, they're held in iron shackles for their first 3 months. Up until 2013, prisoners on death row were always locked up in shackles until their final breath. With 8,000 prisoners crammed in a place with the capacity for 4,000, you can only imagine what it's like surviving here. We'll place Kwang in the welcome to hell category.
Things can always get worse when you're over there. Always get worse. And there's even things worse than death down here.
If the lack of food and space won't kill you, the uncertainty of your last hours might. Inmates on death row usually aren't told of their execution day or time until hours before the injection time. And as brutal as that is, they used to do it by a firing squad. The last execution by gunfire happened in 2012. Your best way to survive here is to avoid going in the first place. Otherwise, you'd better make sure your lawyer can get you out before it's too late. Now, any prison nicknamed the Russian Alcatraz is expected to be rough, but nothing can prepare you for this next spot. Petak Island Prison in Russia makes Alcatraz look like child's play. Like its US counterpart, Petak is surrounded by freezing waters, and escaping from this maximum security facility is next to impossible. For those able to scale its walls and feel like they're strong enough swimmers, escape is still very unlikely. Guards are allowed to shoot on sight, but given the living conditions here, an early demise may be welcomed. With beds made up of wood planks, steel buckets for toilets, and only an hour given outside your cell every day, this place can destroy the strongest-minded inmate. I think we could all agree this belongs in the maximum misery category. It's not the violence at the hands of other inmates you need to worry about, but rather the psychological torture that can drive you mad. And for those of you wanting to rely on visiting hours to keep you going, prisoners are allowed only 2 visitors a year. So you better make them count. Surviving a place like Petak requires you to build a mental fortitude like never before. And even then, you'll likely never be the same if you're ever released. Our next prison takes us to Central Africa, where, to put it lightly, the pursuit of justice completely bulldozed anything that resembled basic human rights. Gitarama Prison in Rwanda was once considered one of the most overcrowded prisons in the world. Built to hold 500, At its peak in the 90s, there were over 7,000 inmates. On average, there were 4 deaths per day. In Gitarama, now operating as the Muhanga Correctional Facility, it wasn't the guards that you needed to worry about. Instead, it was a lack of space and food. With less than a square yard of space per prisoner, most were forced to stand all day. Some died due to starvation, others, suffocation. And as you can imagine, the inhumane living conditions led to infections and gangrene, with some losing their toes or requiring more severe amputations. The lack of basic human rights and horrific living conditions made this place look like hell. So naturally, it'll be going into the welcome to hell category. Today's version of Gitarama is trying to distance itself from the stomach-churning images associated with those conditions, but the hard truth can't be erased. More than half of the inmates were being held without charge or trial, and the sad reality was that those locked up at Gitarama were more likely to die before having a chance to prove their innocence. Surviving Gitarama when it was at its worst would require a lot of luck. You'd need to do your best to make space for yourself, avoid infection, and find food. But at a time when the prison held more inmates than 10 times its capacity, your days would likely be numbered. Well, if this video doesn't make you want to avoid going to prison, I don't know what will. From a lack of resources to violent inmates and inhumane living conditions, these prisons are some of the worst. But we only scratched the surface of how brutal these places truly are. For a more in-depth look, check out our video on South America's toughest prisons. Want to stay alive? Keep watching How to Survive. We'll see you in the next one.